Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean. Today I am doing a writing update. The last time I did a writing update, I think I just finished the second draft of Autumn and Destiny, the fourth book in the Trevor Knight series. So, in the meantime, I did the third draft real quick on the computer, and I also made some maps. I drew some maps and added those into the book. That's the first time I've added maps into my books. That was real sweet. So right now I have the fourth draft of Autumn and Destiny, the book itself, which I am editing with a red pen. I have begun to do an editing explained video where I go through some of the edits I'm making to the fourth draft of the book and talk about them. But I'm not yet done with that video. I need to finish editing Act 1 before I can film that whole video, so waiting on that. So since I like editing so much, I can really do it anytime. It is like dessert for me. So since I am on the editing stage with Autumn and Destiny, I thought, okay, now I could start a new work in progress. So I thought I would start on Grace's Will, which is the second draft of a single title book. But the thing with that, I wrote that book about, 7-8 years ago. As a result, it is the work of a much younger writer, a more inexperienced writer. So I'm just a different writer today. So I was real iffy about what I should do with that book, which direction I should take it in, whether I should try to be faithful to my original idea or just kind of like throw that idea out and completely rewrite the book with my current writing standards, like how I would write the book today, or what. So I gave that book to a beta reader who I just got her feedback last night, and I'm still really undecided about that book. But anyway, I couldn't quite start on that book yet, so I was like, okay, well, which book should I do instead? I actually began brainstorming Babylon Dithers, which is the sixth book in the Trevor Knight series, because the one after Autumn and Destiny, Arabian Dawn, I've already written the first draft of that. So I was kind of like, okay, maybe I'll just brainstorm or even start on Babylon Dithers. So over the course of a few days or a week or whatever, I plotted out that book, and I got about 80% of the plot pretty well figured out. But I am having problems with the fourth act, especially what Trevor Knight's role in that book is, the main character, and I don't want to write this book not quite knowing what the main character is doing in the final act. That's the problem I had with Autumn and Destiny on the first draft. I got to the third draft of that book and just it fell apart because I questioned what are the characters trying to accomplish, why are they here, and it just didn't really make sense. So I had to rewrite the book, and I was just stuck on it for 3 years. So I did not want to do that same thing with Babylon Dithers. I didn't want to start writing the book and get in a jam and realize it's not working out, the plot doesn't hold up. So I couldn't quite work on that book either. Instead, I thought, well, maybe I'll write a chapter or so of Blade of Perdition. And I don't know if this is the first time I've mentioned that series on my channel, but basically I have two magnum opuses, two life's works. One is the Trevor Knight series. The other is Blade of Perdition. Blade of Perdition is a supernatural fantasy involving angels and demons during the apocalypse, basically. I am not a big fan of fantasy, so this is the first fantasy I've ever tried writing, but it's been a major project for me. I have literally been plotting this book out, this series out, brainstorming it in my head for 10 or 15 years. I have been thinking about it, working on it in my head, changing things around, adding to it, but I've never really written much of it. I have written the first 4 chapters, and then I wrote bits and pieces of the rest of the series, because I know how the series goes. It's real well thought out. But at the time, I couldn't quite figure out the first book. Part of the thing was, when I would go to try to write the first book, I would think I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough writer to tell this story yet. And I was really intimidated because I had this whole series mapped out in my head. So it's just trying to get that out onto the page. It was real difficult. And I had a lot of self-doubt and just thinking I'm not good enough to do this. So for that reason, I have not really been able to write this book for 10 or 15 years. So since I was looking for a new work in progress, I was like, well, maybe I'll just try writing a chapter of Blade of Perdition. I thought I may write something in the middle because it's like I had good ideas for what happens throughout the series, but not the first book. But for this time, I was like, no, I'm going to try adding, chapter 4 or 5 or whatever it was. And so I sat down one night and I wrote it. And it was great. So I was like, oh, that was pretty good. The next day, I wrote another chapter. The next day, I wrote 2 or 3 more chapters. Over the course of a week, I wrote and finished the first book. So even though the series took like 10 or 15 years of thought, ultimately I wrote book 1 in the series in just about a week. I do have to say, that is not a full novel. Actually, it wound up being, I think, 42,000 words for book 1. Originally, I was actually calling this the 0 draft. I have never done that before with any of my books. I always do like 7 draft formats. So, first draft, second draft, so on and so forth. With this book, with this series, I thought, well, since there is so much to it, maybe I'll just do like a 0 draft where it's like kind of just sketching my ideas out. It's not like having the pressure of a first draft. So it's kind of like the 0 draft is just sketching out just the basic shape of the plot, the basic shape of the series. But in the end, the first draft or the 0 draft or whatever, the first iteration of book 1 came out really well. So I was really happy with it. So I should backtrack a little and tell you what Blade of Perdition is actually about. So this is a supernatural fantasy involving angels and demons. I don't really know all what to say because it's like spoilery. So as most basic as I can say, like spoiler free as I could say, the book series follows 2 primary characters. There is Blade and Cammy. And as spoiler free as I can, Blade basically becomes on the side of the demons and Cammy becomes on the side of the angels. These are 2 people who grew up together, so they have like the qualities of like best friends, brothers and sisters, and also like potential love interests. So these 2 are just real tight. It's kind of like it begins like a friends to enemies story, but it's also like an enemies to friends or enemies to lovers story as well, because basically they start out real close, but then they become on opposite sides. Cammy with the angels, Blade with the demons, and it gets deeper into the apocalypse basically. And so these 2 characters are on opposite ends, and so it's a question of, are they going to fight each other? Is one going to switch sides? What's going to happen? Are they going to kill each other? Are they going to get along? What's going to happen? There are also 7 archangels in the book and 7 archdemons. So I don't really want to name the whole list because, even that would be spoilery. But there are many familiar names, especially if you've watched like Supernatural. I'm not even going to run through like just the archangels or archdemons. I'll just run through like various and sundries of them. But there's like Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Ramiel. There's Metatron, Samael, Azazel. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't know a lot of names. Paimon, Lucifer, of course. Abaddon, or the Leviathan, who is like the dragon out of the sea in Revelations in the Bible. So Leviathan, Abaddon, same person. Who else is there? Lilith, the archdemon Lilith. But anyway, there's a lot of characters. And where I got inspiration from this series from is really a lot of places. It's not actually from the Bible, so this is not a Christian story. So I cannot emphasize that enough. This is not a Christian series. The inspiration I got is all over the place. The Bible is actually pretty light on details about angels and demons. Like I think it mentions only Michael and Gabriel by name, and that's it. And it doesn't really say much about them. I don't think it mentions Lucifer by name. But I got inspiration from all these various places. So there's like a lot of Christian traditions, like from, hundreds of years after Jesus or whatever, of like Catholic priests or whatever coming up with all this angels and demons lore, and like non-Christian angels and demons lore. There's Islamic traditions. There's a lot of like Jewish traditions, like outside of the Bible. There's, of course, a lot of other places like Paradise Lost, the Book of Enoch, the Divine Comedy. I haven't read that yet. I don't actually know if that, like, how far in depth that goes. But anyway, either way, you'll come across a lot of familiar names if you've, like, read any of this stuff or if you've watched Supernatural or anything. And I borrow a lot of pieces of lore. So I read something, and if something fits where it's like, oh, I could use that in my story, I do. So it will all sound very similar-ish, I think, but also having my own unique twist and telling this own hopefully unique story. So that's basically it. So I've mentioned that it's a series. So the main series of Blade of Perdition takes place over 9 books. And when I say books, I mean that's like each individual part. Actually, I plan to publish these books, these 9 books, within 4 different novels. So just to run through it quickly, the first novel would be called Descent, and that would feature book 1 and 2. And books 1 and 2 feature the first 2 years of the apocalypse. The second book would be called Ascent and would feature books or years 3, 4, and 5 of the apocalypse. Book 3, right now I am calling Torment, and that would be years 6 and 7, or book 6 and 7 of the apocalypse. And finally, book 4 would kind of be like an epilogue to that in a way. It's like the aftermath of the apocalypse, what happens after that. And that is years or books 8 and 9. And that book I am calling Lament. I don't know if I'm going to stick with these exact titles. I don't know, I may switch around Lament and Torment, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of writers would probably have Torment be the final book, but not really for me. I think Lament makes more sense as the 4th book in the series. So that is it. The main series is 9 books or 9 years roughly, even though the epilogue takes place over much longer than that. But basically it's 9 books within 4 novels. That is the main series. There is also a sequel book planned. I don't think it will be a trilogy or anything or a series. I think it'll just be a one and done book. That will be the sequel. And I also have ideas for not 1 but 2 prequels. And again, I think each of those would probably just be solo books, not series. So the way it would basically work is the first prequel would be the first era, kind of. The second prequel, second era, the main series would be third era, and then the sequel book would be the 4th era. Okay, but anyway, so for book 1, it really turned out very well. So I had the plot for it pretty well thought out in my head, but I wasn't quite sure all what to do for it. I mean, like for each, individual scene, all the details and whatnot. But it all came out really well and real easily. In about a week, I wrote the whole book. So I was real proud about that, and I think it's real good. So there's lots of like scenes and chapters that I didn't really plan per se, but they turned out being real good. So I finished that about, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago as I am filming this video. So immediately after finishing book 1, I began working on, the next day, book 2, or year 2 of the apocalypse. At first I was really nervous about this because I did not have much of an idea what actually happens in book 2. I knew like the very start of it, like the first 3 or 4 chapters, and the climax of the book, the final 2 or 3 chapters. But I didn't know anything about what happens in the middle, like the middle 20 or so chapters. So really I didn't know like 90% of the book. And that was real concerning to me because I was real happy with book 1 and I wanted to make book 2 better and keep, building the tension and all that. But I did not have a clue what could happen. So my mom said, just forget about it for a few days and then come back to it. But I didn't want to do that. That's not really my way. When I am on a roll writing, I don't want to give it up. So I went around the house talking aloud to myself, annoying everyone in the house, just trying to plot out this book. And so what I did is I asked myself, What is each character doing? What are their goals? How do they feel about other characters? How do their feelings about other characters affect their goals? Like if they really hate a character, what are they going to do about it? And so I just began thinking, what is each character doing? What are they thinking? And I began to get an idea of what could happen, what could drive the story forward. And within 40 minutes, I had the whole book plotted out. And that was great. And the ending is a little bit different in how I am going to approach it. I had a plan for it, but I'm doing something a little bit different. But it's much more for the better. The new idea is much more better. It makes sense for all the characters, what they are trying to accomplish. It just makes much more sense. So anyway, I have begun working on book 2, and I am already, I think, 3 or 4 chapters in. So that's going good. That's going great. I'm real proud of that. Hey y'all, it's me. So I just wanted to give you an update. I am filming this about, I don't know, 4 days after filming the video, and tonight I just finished book 2 of Blade of Perdition. So the first novel, books 1 and 2, would be finished. Again, this is just kind of the zero draft, I'm calling it. So just trying to sketch out the basic ideas for the book. Book 1 was 42,000 words. Book 2 was only, I think, 15,000 words, so not very long at all. And I don't really know what to think of that so far. So at first when I was writing it, like I say, it was a little bit difficult figuring out the plot. But in the end, after thinking about it, I got the plot figured out. And so I started writing the book. And then in about 3 days, I got to the climax of the book. And I realized I had a problem. I had several plot holes in book 2. So that bothered me, and I didn't know quite what to do. So I considered just like writing just what I had like left over for the ending, like what I am pretty sure happens. Just write that and move on to book 3, or if I should like rewrite the book or what. So I thought about it for a couple days, and in the end what I decided to do is I could just rewrite part of the ending. So not very much at all. I probably threw out about 2 chapters and just rewrote the climax of the book. And overall, I'm pretty happy with it, I guess. It's not great. I still like book 1 more, but book 2 is at least finished. So the first novel currently is done. It is written. So that book would be called Descent. And so that's done. So now I could move on to book 3 or the second novel in the series. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way Blade of Perdition is turning out so far. Again, I'm still just calling this zero draft, just to kind of like reaffirm to myself that the main thing right now is just to get all my ideas out onto the page, because I've been thinking about this series for 10 or 15 years. So it's nice now just to get everything I possibly can onto the page, and that way I can see what works, what doesn't, what I am missing, what I may need to come up with, and then I could have more of a targeted focus, I guess, on what to fix, like what needs fixed, what works and what doesn't. And yeah, so at least I would have something on paper. So overall, I'm happy with it. So that's all. So I think that'll about do it for this video. So thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you in another video. Bye.